Hello, I am Kelly Rogers Flint, a West Coast freelance writer.
I'm Loyd McIntosh, a freelance writer from the southeast of the United States.
And together we are The Rough Draft, the writing podcast.
All right, folks, welcome to the episode 3 of the Rough Draft, the writing podcast. Again, I'm Loyd McIntosh. I'm here with my friend and fellow freelance writer, Kelly Rogers Flint, who's kind of not really globe trotting, but West Coast trotting. Last time she's
Yes,
in California, now she's in where?
I am in a suburb of Seattle, Lake Forest Park, Washington.
Say, all right, cool beans. What's up there in Seattle? That's where you lived for several years, right?
Yes, where I lived for a couple of decades. I am here because my daughter is in theater and they just opened the show Urinetown last night. So I'm here to watch them on stage.
Oh, cool. Did you go last night? Have you seen it yet?
I did.
How was it?
Pretty awesome. It's a great show. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially if you like
Yeah.
quirky dystopian shows.
Oh, okay. So your daughter, what
It
your
has
daughter?
good writing, Lloyd. I'll tell you that. It
That's
has
that's
clever
great.
dialogue and really good lyrics.
That's all we need. I like musicals except for all the singing and dancing. You know. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is your daughter Harper, right? What part does she play? Tell me about her part.
Harper plays Hope Gladwell, which is the female protagonist. They are the daughter of the big company guy who is regulating the use of water in this dystopian future.
As I take a sip.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's really good. Where's it playing?
It's playing at the Edmonds Black Box Theater, produced by Ballyhoo Theater.
Oh, cool.
Just running a couple of weekends, but it's a great show.
That's great. I wish I was there to see it, but I'm several thousand miles away. But
Yeah,
that's,
a
that's
bit of a
awesome
trek.
though. That's awesome
Yeah.
though. Cool beans. Well, I had a little interesting day today. I'm on the, Facebook Marketplace, and someone was giving away a typewriter. And so I went to Talladega, Alabama today. And got this, a Singer.
Ooh.
If you're
Yeah,
listening
nice.
to the podcast, not watching, I'm not sure what year it is. It's a Singer portable typewriter. It's called the
Very cool.
Graduate. Yeah, I have a little collection of typewriters going. That's my fourth. My wife was like, "Where are you going to put it?" I don't know. Probably going to my office. Anyway,
It will
very
find a place.
find out. Yeah, and I don't think it's going to work though. I was thinking, what if I could? We're done with typing on paper. It's over.
Yeah, cool.
All right. So, what are we going to talk about first? We always like to start with some wordplay.
Yes, wordplay. Let's go for it.
All right, so why don't you go first? I've got two underused words I want to talk about,
Oh,
but you've got an
okay.
underused and an overused. And which one do you want to
I have
start with?
a misused
Misused.
and
I'm
an
sorry.
overused. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
misused.
Sure. All
Which
right.
one?
Well, we'll start with the misused, and this is actually a combo. You see these words used sometimes interchangeably, and they're not. The
Ah,
words are adverse and averse.
ah,
So, adverse is when something is harmful or difficult, and it's usually ascribed to a thing. Averse is a strong feeling of dislike and belongs to a person.
yeah.
So, an example would be that rainstorms can cause adverse driving conditions, and many people are adverse to rain.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I can see that being confusing. I've probably done it
Mhm.
myself without even realizing. But I'm a dipstick from Birmingham, Alabama.
But anyway, that's my one to highlight to pay attention to
Hey,
adverse and averse. And if you just really think about them, is that adverse are things, and averse is the way a person feels, or like
yeah,
having an aversion. You can be conflict averse
and
or
those are
risk averse.
you're probably going to
Mhm.
hear those just in casual conversation more than you come across them in writing, obviously. That
Well, it
obviously,
depends what you read.
well, on social media, of course.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, we're going to be in football season soon too. I guess we should talk about
Ooh.
it's lose, LOSE, not loose.
Loose.
We'll talk about it. You made me think about that though.
Yeah.
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 Anyway, well, that's pretty cool. I haven't.
That's,
That's a good one.
yeah. Keep your eye out for it.
I will.
So, what's
Um,
one of your underused words?
I'm going to go with a word that most of us probably first encountered studying geometry.
Mm.
Talking about right angles, and you have acute angles, and you have obtuse angles. But obtuse outside of geometry is really kind of a fun word.
Oh,
It's
it
of
is.
course it means dull, maybe a little slow, um, and I like it. I think it's you know, again, we don't want to just go around insulting people, but if you do have an issue with someone's kind of
Yeah.
not so intelligent take on a topic, calling it obtuse, I think is a good way to describe it. I
Yeah.
like it.
I do too. I think that one really comes in handy because it's not just someone misunderstanding or refusing, something. It's more about a willfully obtuse person. It's like you're not making the effort to understand. It's not
Yeah,
that you're not capable.
yeah.
So I find that people tend to be willfully obtuse.
It was probably used for me in high school, but I probably wasn't paying attention anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it off what would be another word? Like when someone's being thick-headed,
yeah. Well,
refusing
dense.
to, yeah.
Dense
Yes,
is
exactly. Yeah.
exactly. So, but if you'd like to know, I went on the website Etamon
Cool.
Online,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not sure I'm pronouncing correctly, but anyway, it says here it's from the early 15th century, dull, blunted, not sharp, from the Latin obtusus, blunted and dull. So used
Mm,
figuratively, past part. Anyway, so it comes from the
yeah.
15th century, and interesting. Again, it became the common geometry term, but it was originally to describe something or someone as dull, blunted, and not particularly bright. So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Obtuse.
as I said, probably used about me in high school some, but I wasn't.
Ha ha ha.
Anyway, all right, cool. All right,
Cool.
so what you got next? You've got
Um,
an overused
I
big
do
time.
have an overused word. The one I would like to highlight today is the overuse of the word very. And we all know that writers do this, especially young writers. When there's a word count involved,
Oh
um,
yeah,
you get a lot of yeah.
it's I struggle sometimes. I probably shouldn't be admitting this, but I'm going to admit it anyway. When I've interviewed somebody and I'm putting a direct quote and they've dropped in a very or a really a lot in there. Occasionally, I just go ahead and strike it out.
Help them out a bit.
Yeah, I do that quite a bit. And that's one of those words where I will, if it's just becoming, because I like a lot of direct quotes. I record all my interviews, so I really like to get their flavor in
I
there.
do
But
too.
if it
Yeah.
after
Yeah,
a
I
while,
think
I'm going to take
in
those words out.
speech, very is almost like a placeholder where they're trying to find the right word.
Yeah,
They know the feeling is big, so they use the very because that's what it is. It's a modifier to intensify something else. But if you are careful when you're writing, there's usually a better word,
all right.
right? So you don't have to say very hungry. You can say famished,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I was about to ask you if some other. That's a good one there.
Yeah. So most times if you catch yourself saying very something, look for a word that means that and just
Yeah,
replace it. Replace both words, the generic adjective with a modifier, and just find one better adjective.
I've got an example because
Okay.
Kelly and I both wrote for a magazine called Tailgater for a little while. It was all about ball games, tailgate. So I did a story about small college tailgating, and so when you get into like Division two, one double A, Division three, MAI, there's like a many more schools that have college football than Division one. And so I was trying to come up with like, you know, very many or something like that. I ended up saying there's a metric buttload of schools playing football. and they left it in. I'm so anyway. So it's a better term.
Okay.
You can say famished. I'll say metric buttload.
Okay, there you go. But there's usually a better word, It just takes a bit of
Yeah,
effort. You don't, it's not very big, it's huge or it's gigantic or
yeah.
enormous. Sometimes there are a lot of words to choose from.
And again,
And it's lazy, I think, to
yeah.
use very
Well, in writing, when you're sitting down to write,
Mhm.
yes. Now I can understand when you're being interviewed. Like I've been interviewed,
Right.
and
It
you're
gives you time to think
yeah.
sometimes.
So
So,
I think it can be forgiven in those kind of like those high
yes.
pressure, you know, oral conversations where you don't have time to
Mhm.
think or trying to buy some time.
Yes.
It's
Well,
funny.
and I'm not saying it should never be used because sometimes in writing it can be helpful. And of course, my brain's always going to go toward theater. But if you have it in a written play that's being performed, having something that is, that character is speaking and walking towards someone is going very, very, and then it gives them
Yeah,
3 points to accent it and physically move closer and then hit their point. Whereas if it's just one word, it doesn't have that sense of motion and rhythm to it.
yeah,
So it can be used judiciously.
like it. It's not a word that
So I
never
think
needs
it's
to be used. Right. It's
right.
just
You just need to be intentional. You need to know why you're choosing it. They
oh,
call it word choice for a reason, right?
it's very informative, Kelly.
All right. So what else have you got for us on an underused word?
Okay, so I had over the years I think it's mainly just to kind of like build a rapport with my coworkers in my full-time job. And so I've started noticing that I was saying this word a lot and getting a lot of laughs out of it, getting like, did you really just say that? I haven't heard that. And then I'm writing it more in more informal communication just to kind of again get kind of a, did he really just use that word? I love the word unironically groovy. Like like it should still be Brady Bunch in the afternoon. The word groovy kind of died in the late 70s, early 80s. And I say it's time to bring it back. It's a fun word.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's really, tied an era, but again, you're going to use it if you're writing about that period, obviously. But I'd like to hear it more often in just hanging out with people like, that was great. I think that'd be a fun word to reintroduce.
Mm-hmm. I think it puts people at ease. It's a very laid back, chill word, right?
Yeah.
Um, it has a pocket. You kind of sit in a pocket with a groove, right?
That is, oh, how it's like you read my mind because,
Mhm.
of course, the word came from, I mean, the way we use it in slang started in like the 30s and 40s from jazz musicians for
Mm,
that very, hey man, you're in the groove. So like like you said, you're in the pocket there, right?
right.
And then it became teen slang in the 50s and 60s and kind of died out in the 70s. Um, but yeah, it's kind of fun. It started out as a jazz term to say you're in that pocket. It's
Yeah.
it's groovy. It's in the groove. It's groovy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely evokes a mood.
But you got the way you say it. Like I like to say it like groovy. I like to I like to drop my voice an octave and stretch it out. Hey man, that's
Yeah.
groovy.
All right. Well,
I'm a
presentation is everything.
I am a dork of unmitigated proportions. I'm just anyway. Anyway, that's me. That's my word groovy. So I say
Okay.
we kick very to the side and bring in groovy more
Sounds good
often.
to me.
All right. Well, cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll take our first break and then we'll
Okay.
come back and Kelly's gonna drive the discussion to talk a little bit more about writing education in schools.
Sounds good. See
Okay.
you in a bit.
Be back in a bit.
Welcome back to the Rough Draft. I am Kelly Rogers Flint here with Loyd McIntosh. And our main topic today is on writing in education. How is writing taught and how has that changed?
It's going to be a meaty topic today because you and I have traded some articles online, and I think
Mhm.
they're both all of it's interesting, but I would imagine we're not going to jive on the same same ideas,
I don't
but
know.
we'll
We'll
see.
we'll see. We'll see. It is an interesting topic. And I think it is agreed on all the articles that we've read is that students aren't writing as well as they used to.
Yeah.
That the level of writing has deteriorated, and what is college level or what used to be high school level writing is now more what you're seeing in college.
Right.
Uh, and that it's delayed and not as nuanced as it used to be. And so there have been various people that have tried to study this, that have opinions about it, and have written why they think that happens. And so that's what we're going to talk about, that and actually how writing is taught, what is done, both secondary schools, I think, and in college. And it's not all the same. People are treating it differently. So it will be
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, what are your?
So
I mean, before we get into our articles, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know there's what we've seen with a lot of and the reason why I ask is I just did an article for one of my newspapers on a program in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, which is one of the top public school systems in the
mhm.
state, and they've started a credentialing program for kids to take, trying to entice them to take world languages, because we were seeing study of, you know, nobody was taking Spanish and French anymore. And then they also did the
Well,
same thing with the arts. And
mm,
the casualness of the conversation, I didn't really put this in the article, but the whole one of the thoughts was the rush for STEM programming all of a sudden.
mm.
That it kind of, with it all being about you got to learn to code, you got to learn, all this
Mhm.
techie
That's where
stuff.
the jobs are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think we've kind of lost. Again, I just want to get your thoughts on it
Um,
before we
I think
dive
that
into
I
it.
think that is very, very true. And I do think we're seeing backlash against that already. You're seeing things moving to STEAM
Yeah, I've
instead of
seen that a little
STEM.
bit.
It's got to include the arts. And I think you will find, even within tech companies, they are saying now, we can teach you the techie stuff. We need people who know how to communicate well.
Oh, that's great. Great news. Yeah.
Because that's skills that a lot of the techies are not being influenced to become more proficient in both the reading, writing, that part, but also the interpersonal skills that come with just being more literate
Right.
in public speaking and all of those kind of artsy things, soft skills we call them, right?
Yeah.
And people are finding that without the soft skills, it's very hard to apply the hard skills. Um, so
Interesting.
yeah, I think this is an area, and it's showing up pretty early. You hear the term a lot, reluctant readers
Yeah.
and reluctant writers, and I think that is and they kind of go hand in hand. If kids don't like to read, they are most likely not going to like to write.
Right.
Um, and I think reading helps you get better at writing, so they go together.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think, even if you don't get to a point where you love writing, at least unlocking the ability. And I think um from in my case, and we can get more into our personal stories later, but I think I've been thinking about that quite a bit about, I was a terrible student in high school, barely made it through. College was a different story. But once I discovered I could, then it became I want to
Mm.
later. But as you can imagine, with our culture is the way it is, there's a lot of opinions on attacking this. I think we're going to focus mostly on writing rather than reading today in our
Yes.
conversation here. But
Focus.
why don't you talk about? You sent me a
Okay.
couple of articles. Why don't you get started? What did
Okay. Well, this topic popped up in several of the articles, and it was saying that one of the big hurdles to teaching writing for especially secondary school teachers, it's a time factor.
Yeah, yeah,
Grading essays takes a lot of time. And when you have increased classroom size and teachers have 40 students, well, how many essays are they going to assign if they're going to have to read for, probably multiple times because the process of learning to write includes edits. So they're
Right.
going to have to read the students' first drafts, give them feedback, let them try again, and then maybe even a second series of edits, and then the final one. So for one essay assignment, they're going to have to read 120 essays,
Yeah.
right?
Amazing. Yeah. It's a great
So
point.
that it's very prohibitive. And one of the articles even talked about some interesting AI that is being created to help teachers grade essays. And oh boy, that's another can of worms.
You, I found that same topic on an article on Forbes, and I was
Mhm,
kind of, I don't know, I was more intrigued in it in terms of using the
mhm.
AI tools to help grade. Um, but you seem to be a little skeptical, though.
Well, there might be some potential there, but currently the AI is not nuanced enough to give the feedback necessary. It can look for certain markers
Right.
and it scores them, but it tells them this is a 4 out of 5. Well, how is that going to help them if it doesn't tell them what is missing and what they need to do to get it to a 5?
Right.
If it
Fair point.
can't, it's not specific enough. Um, and that's a huge curve. I think I don't know how long it will take AI to get to the point that it can figure out what would make something better, or what's
Yeah.
missing, or
No,
because
I
a
get what
lot
you're
of it
saying. Yeah.
also is it's subjective, and computer generated things tend to do better analyzing objective things, right?
Right.
So saying it's like a weak thesis statement,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. Some
what
guidance
does it
is
need to make it
necessary there. Yeah.
strong? So there anyway. It's just I don't think it's there yet. It might help the teachers get through stuff faster, but it's not going to help the students become better writers.
But what were
Yeah.
some solutions? You sent a couple of articles to me to take a look at, and
Well, one of the articles. This one was on EdSurge, and it was by Jeffrey R. Young. This is an article from 2019 called "Why Students Can't Write and Why Tech is Part of the Problem." And at the end of the article, they basically asked if you were had to do a TED talk on this, and he said, "Well, it'd be pretty short. It would basically say fund
yeah.
education better, so that writing instruction can be better." And I think that is directly alluding to reducing class size, giving teachers more resources. He also pointed out that the curriculum for teaching writing is not um, it's not as good as a lot of the other curriculum for other subject matters, and writing is often lumped in with teaching something else. They expect you to be teaching history and teaching writing, teaching science and teaching writing. You're teaching literature and teaching writing.
Right.
It's coupled with other things as opposed to just teaching the actual mechanics of writing, good sentence structure. There's not a lot of instruction about grammar as there
Right.
was before. And as you pointed out about foreign language, that's the lack of grammar and knowledge about English is showing up now in language
Mhm.
classes, because a lot of the ways you learn a foreign language is a comparative thing. And so if you don't understand the grammar of your own language, if you don't understand um, the different cases for nouns, like in English, we only have a nominative and objective, right? And we don't even use it for all nouns. We only really use it for pronouns. But in other languages, they have more cases. German has 4, Russian has 6,
Right.
and they use it for all nouns, not just pronouns. But if you don't understand, if you can't diagram a sentence and know the difference between a direct object, an indirect object, an object of a preposition, then
Mhm.
understanding cases will be impossible. And not understanding the grammar makes it hard to understand sentence structure. And if you can't write a good single sentence, then how can you write a paragraph, and how can you write an essay? It just,
Right.
the building blocks are missing.
Hmm.
We need more Schoolhouse Rock. We need kids to understand the parts of speech more, right?
But that's a really interesting point there, Schoolhouse Rock, because even the pop culture we were exposed to as a kid, it emphasized,
Yeah.
you know,
We were learning, but it
good,
was fun. It was
yeah,
integrated. And you didn't sit there and think, oh gosh, I'm learning. This is the cartoon about grammar. You were just singing along,
yeah.
conjunction, junction,
And
what's your function, right?
exactly. And
And
it
we
was,
still know them. I bet you know all of them
oh, of
too, right?
course, I'm just a Bill, sitting here in
All
Capitol
of that.
Hill. I mean, how many
Exactly.
of us, at least got some idea of what these concepts were by the time we really started studying them because we watched Schoolhouse Rock? It's
Exactly.
it's an interesting take there. I hadn't thought about that. But I did notice, I think in that article you mentioned, this is where I get a little queasy about some
Mhm.
things is and I think he mentioned uh just getting rid of the well, I call the I format. But the what is the paragraph structure you called it? The three
Five
paragraphs.
paragraph essay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Which again, I always learned as the I format, and I know he mentioned that article kind of maybe doing away
Mhm.
with that, but
He
it's like
he
that gum,
compared
man.
it to paint by numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and but
Well,
but I totally believe in his reasoning behind that. Now, I can see learning that as a starting point. I think the problem is that we stop there, and
I
students only know that generic. They don't know when to make an exception from that. And his point was that every piece of writing is a custom job. There are no rules.
yeah.
We have to think through these problems. And if something doesn't lend itself perfectly to that format, students are stuck and don't know how to approach it. It's a great starting point. It's a beginner level
Yeah.
writing.
And that's what's been going through my head, thinking about
Yeah.
English classes in high school and even in college. I'll tell you an example later, but it was always the rules of grammar.
Mm,
These are guidelines. Right.
right.
Even now, I might have an article that I'm writing or something, and for whatever reason, the flow and I'm trying to get it written, and I'll have a sentence that ended with the word with or something with a preposition. And my mind goes,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I can't do that." If I like, maybe that's the best way to explain. It's like,
Right.
okay, why don't you tell kids you don't want to do that? You don't want to have 50% of your sentences ending that way.
Right.
But the point is to understand how grammar works so that you can you know communicate effectively. Yes, occasionally you might have a sentence that ends with a preposition. It's okay
Right.
if it
Yeah.
communicates effectively,
Right. I
right?
think his point was that we teach the rules, but not the exceptions.
Yeah,
And when the exceptions are necessary and when it creates a better piece. And I think the regular format of the five paragraph essay, it's a masterfully concise thing, and I use it all the
yeah, I do
time
too. Yeah,
for certain things. But there are times when it doesn't work.
yeah,
Um, and that's okay too. And I think that he is right. We don't teach people how to evolve past that.
yeah. I think that's a great point. And that's kind of what I want to go to
Yeah.
is that all these should be. This is how you get started. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I know. I read after William F. Buckley passed away, there was a book written about him, and the author was on a podcast and said, well, sometimes he used the Oxford comma, sometimes he didn't. He was
Mm-hmm.
never, you know. And I think a lot. I'm like that sometimes,
Or there are
but
cases where the lack of it
yeah,
changes the meaning and you
yeah,
forget
it's
it.
the point is that okay, are you effectively communicating in your writing? And
Right.
if the reader is engrossed in it, the story I was going to tell you, I got two stories about college. Now, as I
Okay.
mentioned, I was in high school. I mean, I don't know how the heck I got through high school. I mean, I was just a didn't give a crap about it student, but got into
Mm.
college. And my English 101 professor, I got so lucky. He was a full tenured professor. He taught 400 level, graduate level English. For whatever reason, they assigned him a one-on-one class, and I was in his class. And he was just such a decent guy. Just, all of the English teachers I ever had in high school, junior high were like, drill sergeants, what I mean? Just that kind of militant. And
Mhm.
he assigned he assigned us our first assignment, which is to write an essay about a place we like to go. Just something that, a place we like to go that means something to us. So I wrote about, you probably remember Charlemagne Records over on 5 Points South in Birmingham. Kelly's from Birmingham, if you don't know.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
anyway, and then, so the next day in class, he showed like the first paragraph of my essay as an example of a good essay, of a good paragraph. I was stunned. I'm still stunned. It's been 35 years. I'm still stunned by that because I was terrible at it in high school. And, again, he talked a little bit later about some of the things that I did in the paper that were, could probably be cleaned up. But the fact that he showed that first paragraph, that's when I said it unlocked the ability, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't about like, oh, we had a comma splice here. It wasn't that. It was, did I communicate the emotion or something like that effectively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this article, he makes it very evident that teaching writing is he in fact he says it can't even really be taught. He says, I can create the conditions and experiences under which writing can be engaged with and challenges that are interesting and get students to want to do it more. And that's what he says about teaching writing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
because finding your own voice and being a good writer is a very personal journey. And I agree with that. But yeah, if, I do think people are lucky to have someone that encourages their writing, that finds something good in it. And the way it is taught currently in education, there are just way too many red marks on papers, right?
Yeah.
Or well, it's not red marks on papers anymore. It's, side notes in a Google Doc. But it can be heartbreaking. It can be hard. And I've even had that happen to me professionally, where there was a new editor once at a publication I'd been working for years, and they just massacred one of my papers or one of my articles. And I was like, I showed it to one of the other staff, and I was like, what is up with this? And they were like, whoa, I don't know. And they read through the article that I had written. They're like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I having the right teachers, and it's true for any subject, can make a big difference in motivation, and all of those things. But it's hard for teachers to make those connections and to be the right teachers for students when their classrooms are so overly full.
Yeah.
It's not just that they have those 40 students in that class. If it's a high school teacher, they're probably teaching 4 sections of that.
Right.
So they have 160 students. So if they assign an essay one week, they're not reading 40 essays, they're reading 160 essays. And that's just,
that's insane. That is where I hope that AI can at least be of some assistance. Like I would never have an AI tool, just write something and I go like, but perhaps it gets to the point where the teacher can, use it and then quickly, take what it's suggesting and then read that for themselves and say, okay, you know what I mean?
Let it do the first run, and then
yes, of course,
make comments. Possibly, I think a lot of teachers do something now, especially on first drafts, that I think is really helpful, and that is peer review.
Yeah,
and peer edits. So swapping papers with your neighbor, not only does that save them from having to read all the first drafts, but it lets the students see someone else writing in their same class, and maybe give them a little comfort of knowing, oh, this person's kind of struggling with this too. It's not just me. And sometimes it's easier to see a pattern and a mistake in someone else's writing than in your own, because you're not as emotionally attached to it.
All right.
And editing can make you a better writer. So I think tools like that are going to be very, very important. Back to this article in EdSource, his opinion was decidedly against using AI for grading purposes. And he says efficiency is not a value when it comes to learning to write.
Yeah.
And so,
I, I get it. I mean, again, I don't want to turn everything over to
yeah,
AI. I don't, but at the same time, it's like, okay, is there a
yeah,
way to?
it's like survival. It's not a best case scenario, right? So, I think it's perhaps going to have to be balanced with teachers doing some of both. Um,
Yeah, the article I sent you from Forbes was written by a gentleman named Ulrich Boser. I don't know who he is, but I believe CEO. He's the CEO of the learning agency.
oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So he had a little bit of a different take on the AI and thinks that there's a way to leverage it. I mean, it's here anyway, right? So the point is, okay,
Mhm.
can we leverage it to help in this problem? Uh, but again, I can see why, I mean, we're all struggling with it. We're all struggling to figure out, how this is going to manifest itself um, in things we read, whether it's just simple ad copy or a 600 page novel. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah,
ah,
that
I don't
article had
know.
some scary statistics in it. One that was really notable to me was that in 2022, a study showed that in the US, fewer than half eighth graders are able to write long answer questions on tests or assignments
Right.
that involve writing at grade level. Fewer than 50%.
No.
That's crazy.
And I think that's important for us to mention here for people might be listening is that we're not just talking about being a creative writer. We're talking about just being able to answer a question, as Kelly just mentioned,
Mhm.
in two or three sentences. You know, understand the topic, explain it, and maybe in some cases defend it,
Mhm.
right? And it's not necessarily all about creative and being poetic and everything. It's about, hey, learning to think and evaluate and come to an understanding of a topic and defend your point,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, we're not talking about the need just to continue to write 500 word essays in school. We're talking about just you know um, give your opinion on something or explain in an essay question on a test.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a scary, that is a scary
Yeah.
statistic.
Yeah, there was a third article on Glassworks by Connor Buckmaster from 2021. It was a
Mhm.
writing revolution in American education and culture. And he was basically saying that the problem is cultural about wanting to be a better writer or learning writing. And and his whole thing was that writing is taught as a product rather than a process. And it's more about the end game rather than how you get there. And
Yeah.
so the kids aren't getting the tools, they're skipping steps. And and also it noted that that kids are doing good writing. It's just not the way we want it. They write great stuff for their posts on Instagram.
Yeah.
They create content. They can be well spoken. They can write eloquently, but they don't necessarily follow academic standards. They don't um, do it in the same practiced ways that we are used to.
Yeah. It's funny because I think we're looking at the same article. This was by who's it by here? Jeffrey R. Young. This is on EdSurge. This is on actually
Yeah,
this is the Q&A from a podcast, and he mentioned that he also mentioned that kids understand once he kind of explains it to them that they understand intuitively how to write for a different audience. Because he mentioned that he
right.
he teaches kids, okay, if you're going out for the night with your friends and you're getting your friends together and you text them all, your text is going to have a different angle and flavor than the one you send to your parents, right? And so he uses that as a light bulb
Mhm.
moment about
Right.
tailoring your writing for the audience you intended for it to be for. And I just ended a sentence
Right.
with the word
Right.
for.
He says, and that's the problem with assignments in school is that students often see it as they're writing for the teacher, and
Yeah.
really that's not what should be they're not learning the audience part of it, or when they're doing it for standardized testing, it's almost like there is no audience. They're writing for a disembodied out there grading system thing,
Yeah.
as opposed to knowing who you're writing for, and two, makes all the difference. So yeah, integrating that back into the curriculum, and letting the kids know who's receiving the message can make a big difference in their ability to write. I think there's still going to be pushback on punctuation, though. Kids do not like
They
punctuation.
don't, but going back to the article I was telling you about that I just finished writing, both teachers talked about, the race to get the highest ACT score or highest SAT score
Mm.
or get the highest GPA is turning kids into, and then compared that, combine that with the rush towards STEM programming, which is important. I'm not saying it's not. It is, but it left this, it left writing and the arts behind. And what they're saying is that, we need, like you just mentioned a little while ago, companies are seeing the value of that now. Well, they're already saying that colleges are starting to say, you know what, we're not necessarily interested in all these kids with, a 4.0 GPA, that they want to make sure the kids have, different interests, and not necessarily just a lot of volunteer things that are on their resume, but do they have an interest in the arts? Can they carry on a conversation? Can they write effectively? And
Yeah.
that's not always going to be reflected on a GPA or an ACT score.
Right. It
Yeah.
can't be quantified quite that way. Yes, I think the other thing we're seeing pushback in universities. I was just texting with my sister earlier today. Shannon Flint is a professor of classics and art history at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, and asking her about the university's writing requirements. And she says, she told me that all the students are required to take 2 writing classes, and you can opt out of one if you have a certain level score on an AP, AP
Yeah.
Lang, or an IB course equivalent. Um, but that, but everyone still has to take at least one.
Yeah.
And it was the same for my son going to American. There were 2 writing courses. He could opt out of one from his AP score, but he still had to take one. Now, my daughter that's at NYU, their requirement is 2 writing courses for every single student in every single school and every single major university
Oh,
wide,
that's
because
fantastic.
they do not want anyone holding an NYU diploma that is not an effective writer. And that's their way to make sure it's certain. Everyone has to take it
Yeah.
at the university level, no exceptions, period.
And that's fantastic. Again,
And
you're talking about college level kids at that point too. What do we do about those kids who aren't going to go to college or not going to go to
yeah,
NYU? Still, I mean, we need good writers. We need kids who can, express
yeah,
their thoughts in writing. Uh, Interesting topic. You mentioned your daughter. I have a daughter who is at UAB right now. She took a comedy class as a freshman. It was part of the honor, and I think that's kind of interesting. I had wanted to sit in it because I know they talked about the craft of creating, humorous writing, but they also watched a lot of uh, stand-up comedians from the past, like even some Sam Kinison, which I was like,
fun.
that's bold.
Mhm.
But I think that's kind of, now again, I wouldn't want that to be like a, replace English 101 or something. It was an elective, but again, I
Mhm.
think that's kind of an innovative way to say, your writing doesn't have to be, boring and 5,000 words essays that are, you know, meant to
Right,
induce,
right,
meant to
yeah,
cure insomnia.
yeah. Just wanted to throw out there, you had a story about a college professor. I'm going to give a shout out to my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Paulette Campbell at Mortimer Jordan High School in Morris, Alabama. She required us to keep journals.
Oh, did she?
She did. And the best part of it was she promised never to read it. Literally, it was just check mark. Did you fill the pages? Did you?
Really?
She just said, you have to write. Just write anything you want. You
Oh,
can
that's
write pages
fantastic.
about how much you hate this class, how much you hate writing in your journal, but just write over and over. And it's like,
Yeah.
and in some ways, I think it was brilliant because you just literally had to put pen to paper and write.
Yeah. Definitely
And
not my experience.
it took away that feeling of I have to write a certain way. It has to be good. It has to this or that. You could just write, and the freedom and the liberty of to just get the
Yeah.
thoughts out of your head and on paper, and especially at that time in your life, all that good heavens, seventh and eighth grade are awful, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I was like, what a brilliant, brilliant thing to do to
Yeah.
just write, just to get credit just for the process of writing
Yeah.
without it being graded. And kudos to her.
That's an innovative way to do it because again, we're talking about not having time to grade essays. That's a great way to spur it on.
Just
Just
yeah, and then of course we had essays that she did read
yeah,
and graded and stuff, but point she just wanted to get us uninhibited,
yeah, exactly.
just
Yeah.
to get us unstuck, to just get used to actually writing. And I thought that was pretty fabulous. Still do.
Well, we've been going long-winded like we like to do because we do. But
Okay.
any last thoughts? Okay, so what's the cure? What's the solution? Do we have a
Um,
solution?
I don't think there is a simple solution, but funding education is never going to be the wrong answer.
Yeah. Uh, I know we always blame all the technology. We blame, a lot of things, television, we blame the internet, we blame social media. I mean, we've been hearing those boogeymans for decades now. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know if that's really the cause or not,
Yeah,
but no, I have no solutions
yeah.
right now. Anyway, well, we may come back to this. I think at some point we ought to bring some educators on and kind of get their
I
perspective.
think that would be great. And as always, if you have comments or suggestions, you can reach us at the rough draft, the writing podcast at gmail.com.
You want to talk about long-winded? You got to be long-winded to read that email address. We're gonna have to fix that at
Oh,
some
and we
point.
have a new website now, right? So
Yeah.
Loyd, tell them where to find the
Oh
website.
yeah, no, it's not completely finished yet, but it's going to
Okay.
be the URL is rough draft dash podcast.com. And so it's about halfway finished. We're going to be putting at some point we'll have a blog on there where we're going to get to write what
Mhm.
we want to, some things, some items
Yeah.
there, and we're going to be putting
Or
all
you
the
can,
episodes there as well.
right? And you can comment on our Facebook page. There are ways to reach us if you want to.
If you want to. Please want
That's
to.
right.
That's why we're
That's
writers
right.
too. I mean, we're needy. We're needy, emotionally damaged,
Mm,
not really.
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Any last thoughts before we take a break?
No, I think that was a lively discussion, and I would love to hear some comments at some point on it. But I think we're good, Loyd. Nice
Okay.
chatting with you as always.
You too. We're going to take a break and we're going to come back with our recommendations. And I'm going to probably uh, throw an on the spot at Kelly. We'll see. Back shortly.
All right.
And welcome back to the Rough Draft Podcast. Loyd McIntosh with Kelly Rogers Flint. And our last segment, and but before we get to our recommendations, we're trying to build up a section what we call on the spot, where we get questions from
Mm,
our listeners, but we really haven't gotten it yet. So Kelly doesn't know I'm going to ask her an on the spot question, but
mm.
Kelly, as you know, is
Okay.
a reviews theater for Broadway World, and I'd like to know what is the worst play you've had to review.
Mm, mm. That's okay. So, do you mean the worst play or the worst production?
Either one.
That's
What
two
sticks in your
very
mind?
different things. Sometimes the problem is the actual content,
Yeah,
right? If there aren't good lines, it doesn't matter how great the actors are, right? And then sometimes it's what they do with the lines that's the
yeah,
problem.
Yeah.
So those are two different things. It can be a bad production and it can be a bad play. Um, hmm, trying to think the worst. Um, okay, I think one of the worst ones I've seen in.
Oh, Kelly has frozen on my end. Oh no. I wanted to hear
It,
the story.
okay, did it come back?
You're back.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
She was just about to tell us about a terrible play.
Okay,
And then I think maybe the gods
well,
decided not to let her do it.
I've been intervened. It was a musical. It was the Griswold's Christmas Vacation. It was made into a musical,
Oh my
and
God.
so in the theater world, before shows go to Broadway, they are in this developmental stage where they run at regional theaters, so big theater houses and big theater hubs. And during this process, they're still editing and things evolving. Sometimes they drop songs or they add songs or they change things in the script before it's ready for its Broadway run. So I was seeing a show that was still pre-Broadway, but it was problematic, is to say the least. It had problems. It was like it only wanted to run off the nostalgia of the um Chevy Chase character. It was like name recognition is what would get people in their seats, but I'm not sure what would make them come back for act two. They
Right.
hadn't thought that through very well. It was greatly lacking. And
Huh.
one of the
What?
one of the most important things in theater, in musicals, is the end of act one is always a big number, and that has to hook you
Right.
and set up act two. And the show had a song about the family eating in a moose themed restaurant, and it could totally be extrapolated. It did not move the plot, it did not present conflict, it did not have character development. It had no reason to be in the show. And
It sounds like a
there were a
train
lot of
wreck.
people feeling like they had no reason to stay in the audience, and so that was a bad one.
That's awesome. Good. Thanks for that. I've been I wanted to know more about that world at some point, Um, but cool beans. All right.
Okay,
So let's,
so what are you reading now? What have you just read?
what have I just read? Well, I just finished a book. I just finished the classic football book, North Dallas 40, which I had started some time ago. And I tell you, I saw the movie first and then I started trying to read the book. And man, it's brutal. I mean, it really is. I mean, it does not paint a good picture of the professional football. And that was in the late 60s, early 70s when Peter
Mm,
Gent wrote that book. But I did finally finish it today. And it is, yeah, we're probably going to talk about this at some point about books versus the movie. It's
right.
wildly different in a lot of ways. But I finished that this morning, as a matter of fact. But
Okay.
what about you?
I have been recently reading some nonfiction, and I just realized that I had two recently that I thought would be particularly interesting to people that are interested in writing, because one was by a journalist, a memoir, and the other was by a writer. So the first one I read, I'll show this here on the camera, is
Okay.
called Burn Book, Kara
Uh-huh.
Swisher. So she was the cutting edge leading journalist with the birth of the tech world. So she covered all things tech, um,
Hmm.
starting in DC in New York, and then obviously had to relocate to the West Coast where all tech things were happening in
Right.
Silicon Valley, right? And so it goes through her multi-decade career, from the very beginnings of big names like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, um, Zuckerberg,
Right.
all of these people, and you really get to see her take on them and how they compare and how they fit into this whole world of tech, and the boom and the bust and the aftermath, and very interesting. And she has a lot to say about reporting, being a journalist, and journalistic integrity and challenges she faced as a writer.
Hmm.
um, so anyone that's looking into becoming a journalist, I think her book is pretty awesome.
Very cool. we're she and I, Kelly and I are recording this on Zoom, and we're trying to use the free version. So we got about 2 minutes left. So
Oh dear.
yeah,
Okay.
so we may have to come back in a moment, but
Okay.
my recommendation is an article I put on Facebook, our Facebook page, a few days ago, on inc.com, inc.com. And it's written by Jessica Stillman, who does a daily column about tech uh, for the news outlet. And the article is on 7 words that suggest a text was written with AI. And real quick, what she's talking about uh, in this column is a study done by Northwestern University and a university in Germany, the University of Tübingen. I don't know German, Tübingen maybe.
Okay.
But sorry, but they analyzed 14 million paper abstracts published on PubMed. I'm sorry, between 2010 and 2024, and they were able to find words that were used more frequently after tools like ChatGPT came out. And the list, she can go into more detail about the article, about the study in the article. But the words were delves, showcasing, underscores, comprehensive, crucial, intricate, and pivotal. And so what the researchers are saying is if you see those words being used more often in text, good chances it was written by a tech tool like ChatGPT. So interesting. It's on our Facebook page already, but that's my main recommendation for today.
Great. I'll save mine for other one for next time.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, y'all, thank you for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And again, I'm Loyd McIntosh.
And I'm Kelly Rogers Flint, and this is The Rough Draft, the writing podcast.